What if I told you that one emperor's simple decision to move his palace would accidentally unleash centuries of bloodshed and create Japan's most legendary fighting force? In 794, when Emperor Kammu chose to abandon Nara for a fresh start in what we now call Kyoto, he had no idea he was lighting the fuse for warrior dominance that would reshape an entire civilization. This wasn't just relocating furniture. This single choice would birth the samurai and plunge Japan into an era where steel decided everything. Emperor Kammu's establishment of Heian-kyo represented far more than architectural ambition or political showmanship. By creating this new seat of power, he inadvertently designed a system where central authority would slowly crumble under its own weight. The Heian court became completely obsessed with Chinese-inspired elegance, spending their days perfecting poetry competitions and elaborate Buddhist rituals while ignoring the harsh realities brewing in distant territories. These pampered nobles lived in a bubble of silken ceremony, completely disconnected from the violent struggles happening beyond their palace walls. They treated military matters like dirty work beneath their refined status, preferring to debate philosophical concepts rather than deal with rebellious provinces or frontier conflicts. This aristocratic negligence created massive opportunities for ambitious families willing to get their hands bloody. The court's ingenious solution was delegation. They appointed tough local strongmen as estate supervisors and tax enforcers, giving them enormous freedom to operate however they saw fit. The only requirement was keeping money flowing toward Kyoto and preventing outright chaos. These positions, originally meant as short-term administrative roles, quickly became family inheritances that concentrated incredible wealth and military strength in provincial hands. Wealthy court nobles became absentee owners who never visited their rural properties, completely dependent on these local warriors to manage everything. This arrangement perfectly suited both sides initially. The aristocrats could maintain their luxurious lifestyle without leaving their comfort zone, while provincial leaders gained legitimate authority to build their own power bases. During the 9th and 10th centuries, these estate managers transformed into something entirely different, a professional warrior caste with their own code, equipment, and loyalty systems. Unlike the ineffective conscript armies from earlier periods that drained resources while accomplishing nothing, these provincial forces consisted of career fighters who bought their own gear and maintained their own horses. These warriors developed fierce personal devotion to their immediate commanders, rather than distant imperial concepts they barely understood. This created intricate networks of personal relationships based on mutual benefit and shared danger, the foundation stone of future samurai culture. The northern frontier became the forge where this warrior mentality was hammered into shape. Campaigns against the Amishi peoples of northern Honshu stretched across centuries, providing both training opportunities and testing grounds for provincial fighters. The Emishi were masterful horsemen and archers who had successfully defended their territories for generations using guerrilla warfare that made traditional Chinese military doctrine completely useless. Battling them demanded individual creativity, exceptional riding skills, and lethal precision with ranged weapons, abilities that became defining characteristics of samurai martial excellence. These frontier wars were savage affairs that bore no resemblance to the romanticized combat described in court poetry. Warriors confronted enemies who knew every hill and valley intimately, launching surprise attacks from thick forests and treacherous mountain passages. Survival required personal expertise rather than formation discipline, while victory brought concrete rewards through land grants and official recognition. The psychological transformation caused by this frontier warfare was profound. It created a mindset that prized practical results over academic theory and personal reputation over bureaucratic position. The most effective military leaders began attracting followers from throughout the eastern regions. These commanders offered protection, advancement opportunities, and shares of conquest spoils in exchange for unwavering loyalty and military service. This relationship differed fundamentally from the impersonal administrative structures of Heian government, creating tightly bonded military groups united by personal oaths and shared risks. The Minamoto and Taira clans emerged as the most formidable among these military dynasties, both claiming descent from imperial princes who received family names and provincial assignments to establish independent fortunes. The Minamoto, also called Genji, traced their lineage to Emperor Seiwa and built their primary stronghold in the Kanto region of eastern Japan. The Taira, known as Heike, claimed Emperor Kamu as their ancestor and initially focused their influence in western territories before expanding eastward. These genealogical connections to imperial bloodlines were essential for legitimacy in a society where ancestry determined social rank. The ability to trace one's family tree to an emperor justified wielding power that might otherwise appear treasonous. However, these imperial links were frequently distant and sometimes completely fictional, serving as political instruments rather than accurate historical documentation. What mattered wasn't the truthfulness of these claims, but their acceptance by supporters and competitors alike. The Minamoto constructed their influence through strategic alliances with local property owners and Buddhist temples across the Kanto Plains. They established networks of fortified settlements that functioned as both administrative headquarters and military bases. These compounds, usually built on high ground with excellent views of surrounding areas, featured wooden barriers, observation towers, and storage facilities for weapons and supplies. The central mansion, constructed in modified Shinden-zukuri architecture, adapted for defensive needs, housed the clan leader's family while providing conference space for his retainers. The Taira pursued different tactics, emphasizing sea trade and maintaining stronger connections to the imperial court. Their headquarters at Itsukushima, featuring its renowned floating torii gate, symbolized their combination of military might and religious influence. The Taira navy dominated the inland sea, Japan's most crucial commercial route, generating vast wealth that funded their military growth and court connections. This maritime emphasis provided advantages in transportation and supply lines that their land-based competitors initially couldn't match. The weapons and equipment that separated these warrior groups from court soldiers developed through practical experience rather than theoretical planning. Their primary weapon was the asymmetrical composite bow, constructed from bamboo and wood layers that delivered both flexibility and striking power. These bows, exceeding 2 meters in length, could accurately place arrows at distances beyond 200 meters, making them devastating battlefield tools. Master metalworkers began perfecting revolutionary heat treatment methods that produced blades, combining razor-sharp cutting surfaces with flexible cores, maintaining their deadly edge through prolonged battles while avoiding catastrophic breaks. These primitive swords, though lacking the artistic sophistication of future masterworks, marked extraordinary progress in metallurgical science and craftsmanship techniques. Combat philosophy emerging from wilderness campaigns emphasized personal excellence within coordinated group tactics. Fighters advanced in scattered formations, hunting chances for individual duels while staying alert to their companions' locations. Perfect engagements started with arrow volleys at maximum range, transitioning to mounted spear or blade charges when enemies approached. This strategy demanded intensive preparation and absolute confidence between team members, building the unbreakable connections that defined samurai military units. Warrior education encompassed far beyond weapon drills, including expert riding, aquatic skills, and diverse physical strengthening exercises. Psychological preparation proved equally vital, incorporating contemplative practices borrowed from Buddhist and Shinto customs that stressed mental sharpness and emotional discipline during crisis situations. These initially practical responses to combat demands slowly evolved into sophisticated philosophical frameworks that would shape samurai identity across generations. The financial backbone supporting this rising fighter class depended on controlling farmland and the labourers cultivating it. Unlike European feudal systems where property ownership typically came through superior lord grants, Japanese warriors frequently obtained territories through conquest, matrimonial alliances, or direct development of virgin lands. This fostered more entrepreneurial wealth-building approaches and stronger links between military duty and financial benefits. Connections between provincial fighters and imperial administration remained intricate and frequently contradictory during this developmental era. Warriors required court validation to legitimize local power, while imperial authority needed armed force to preserve theoretical provincial control. This reciprocal dependency opened pathways for ambitious military chiefs to secure court influence while preserving regional dominance. Religious establishments contributed crucially to developing samurai traditions. Buddhist temples offered schooling, healthcare, and occasionally martial instruction for aspiring warriors. Shinto sanctuaries provided spiritual safeguarding and neutral conference venues for competing clans. The blended religious customs emerging from these interactions would deeply impact samurai principles and conduct patterns. Progressive militarization of Japanese civilization throughout the late Heian era generated fresh social classifications and connections challenging established court hierarchies. Provincial warriors began viewing themselves as separate classes with distinct values and customs, differentiated from both sophisticated court aristocracy and farming peasantry. This developing consciousness would solidify during late 12th century conflicts, preparing foundations for Japan's inaugural military administration. By mid-12th century, provincial warrior families, emerging during Heian times, found themselves increasingly entangled in imperial court political schemes. Court nobility, despite cultural sophistication and administrative knowledge, had become militarily powerless, depending entirely on armed provincial clans to resolve disputes their complex bureaucratic systems couldn't handle. This reliance would devastate traditional order by providing ambitious military commanders direct governmental access and intimate political intelligence. Initial major evidence that warriors had become essential to court politics emerged during the Hogan Rebellion of 1156. Emperor Toba's death sparked succession struggles between his eldest son, retired Emperor Sutoku, and younger son, Emperor Go-Shirakawa. Both factions recruited military backing from Minamoto and Taira clans, marking the first instance of samurai armies battling within the capital itself. The conflict exposed complete military helplessness of court nobility, who observed from palace compounds while mounted warriors determined their political destiny through street combat in Kyoto. Taira officials skilled in both combat techniques and governmental procedures could implement imperial commands through armed strength, while preserving ceremonial traditions that provided administrative actions constitutional authenticity. This fusion of military and civilian control generated massive riches for the Taira dynasty. Command of essential court roles offered access to taxation income from throughout Japan, while their naval mastery enabled them to control commerce with Song China. The Taira Armada, operating from strongholds across the inland waterway, collected trade taxes, moved merchandise, and supplied security services, producing earnings far surpassing conventional farming revenue. Historical documents reveal that Taira prosperity during this era exceeded many territorial administrators and matched resources of major Buddhist temple complexes. Yet Kiyomori's triumph also established circumstances for inevitable Taira collapse. His clan's swift acquisition of governmental roles and financial benefits created bitterness among both established aristocracy and competing warrior dynasties. The Taira started embracing the sophisticated lifestyle of court elites, sacrificing the military sharpness that brought them dominance while simultaneously alienating potential armed supporters through their restrictive practices. Conditions worsened when Kiyomori attempted manipulating imperial inheritance to install his baby grandson on the throne. This extraordinary claim of military authority over the imperial establishment violated core principles of Japanese administration and supplied his adversaries with potent propaganda tools. Even allies began questioning whether the Taira had forsaken their warrior essence, pursuing court extravagance and political dominance. By 1180, resistance to Taira governance had united around Prince Mochihito, offspring of retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa. The prince's appeal for armed opposition against Kiyomori's administration provided legal justification that territorial warriors required to validate uprising against established authority. More crucially, the revolt offered chances for exiled Minamoto survivors to reclaim their ancestral status and revenge their clan's previous defeats. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who had endured 20 years of banishment on the Izu Peninsula under Hojo family supervision, received Prince Mochihito's battle summons in the 8th month of 1180. His response displayed the strategic brilliance that would define his complete career. Rather than instantly launching desperate attacks against superior Taira troops, Yoritomo began systematically constructing an Eastern warrior alliance, sharing complaints against Kiyomori's regime. The Genpei conflict commenced with Yoritomo's revolt at Yamakita in Sagami province. His opening force comprised fewer than 300 mounted fighters, mainly recruited from his Hojo connections and their direct vassals. This humble start reflected the careful planning that would distinguish Yoritomo's approach throughout the struggle. Unlike earlier rebellions depending on spectacular displays and swift conquests, he designed a methodical campaign gradually expanding his influence while avoiding premature battles with overwhelming enemy numbers. The initial major clash happened at Ishibashiyama, where Yoritomo's tiny army met a substantially larger Taira force under Oba Kagechika. The encounter revealed both the tactical complexity of late Heian combat and the significance of intelligence networks in deciding results. Battling in steep terrain during torrential rainfall, both armies struggled with visibility and coordination difficulties that broke their formations into countless small squad engagements. The Minamoto troops, despite battling with frantic bravery, were crushed by numerical superiority and compelled to withdraw into thick Hakone mountain forests. Yoritomo himself barely avoided capture, concealing in a hollow log while Taira search teams passed within arm's length of his hiding spot. This near catastrophe taught him essential lessons about conventional warfare restrictions and the necessity of maintaining secure territorial bases, providing sanctuary during temporary failures. Instead of trying to reconstruct his destroyed army immediately, Yoritomo crossed to Awa province on the Boso Peninsula, where he started the patient coalition development that would eventually deliver victory. His method differed completely from traditional warrior command styles. Rather than demanding instant military service based on personal devotion or feudal duty, he offered prospective partners tangible advantages through land distributions, court positions, and security from Taira revenge. The Kanto territory proved responsive to Yoritomo's appeal for specific reasons reflecting wider tensions within Heian civilization. Many regional warrior families had been denied benefits of Taira governance despite their military contributions during previous conflicts. The concentration of governmental appointments and financial advantages within Kiyomori's immediate relatives had generated a growing class of ambitious yet frustrated territorial commanders who viewed rebellion as their sole advancement opportunity. The Minamoto presented advancement based on achievement, immediate leadership access, and chances to help build fresh organizational frameworks. These rewards proved especially appealing to younger offspring of established households who encountered restricted opportunities under conventional inheritance systems. Meanwhile, Kiyomori's reaction to the expanding revolt exposed strategic flaws that would ultimately destroy Taira dominance. Instead of instantly deploying his administration's complete resources to eliminate the insurrection, he initially dismissed it as minor territorial unrest resolvable through standard enforcement measures. This error provided Yoritomo essential time to strengthen his stance and recruit extra allies. When Kiyomori finally grasped the danger's magnitude, his military reaction was hindered by the very achievements that elevated the Taira to supremacy. 20 years of palace existence had weakened numerous Taira fighters and disconnected them from brutal provincial combat realities. Their gear, strategies, and command had become focused on ceremonial duties rather than practical battlefield efficiency. More critically, the Taira confronted a strategic puzzle that would torment them throughout the struggle. Their influence remained centered in western Japan and the inland maritime zone, while the rebellion had seized the economically crucial Kanto plains. Any effort to eliminate the uprising demanded lengthy expeditions in unknown lands against adversaries enjoying local backing and detailed geographical understanding. The first major Taira assault against Yoritomo's fortress commenced in early 1181 under Taira no Koremori's leadership. The mission revealed both continuing Taira military capability and the tactical benefits that defensive positions offered determined defenders. Koremori's army, estimated at 70,000 troops, represented among the largest military assemblies gathered in Japan during the Heian era. Yet the expedition quickly faced supply difficulties that would define much of the Genpei conflict. Feeding such enormous forces during winter proved extraordinarily challenging, especially when operating where local population supported enemies. Minamoto guerrilla strikes on provision trains and systematic food storage destruction forced Koremori to split his army into smaller, more exposed units. The crucial battle happened at the Fuji River, where Minamoto troops under Yoritomo's brother Yoshitsune achieved total tactical surprise. The clash began before sunrise when Yoshitsune's horsemen charged through waterfowl flocks roosting beside the Taira encampment. The sudden cacophony of countless birds launching into flight generated terror among Taira forces, who confused the sound for massive enemy assault. During the resulting chaos, much of Koromori's army retreated without mounting serious opposition. The Fuji River encounter marked the start of Minamoto's strategic dominance that would define the war's remainder. Yoritomo's troops had proven their capacity not only to protect their territorial foundation, but to crush major Taira campaigns through superior methods and regional expertise. More significantly, the triumph established Minamoto's reputation for military excellence that would draw additional followers and discourage potential opponents. Establishing Yoritomo's warrior administration at Kamakura signified more than simple leadership change. It marked the beginning of revolutionary governmental transformation that would persist for nearly 7 centuries. However, the first shogun's death in 1199 generated immediate succession turmoil, threatening to demolish the infant warrior regime before it could completely solidify its power. Yoritomo's eldest offspring, Minamoto no Yorie, inherited the shogunal position at 17, but lacked both his father's political wisdom and personal connections that maintained the Eastern Warrior Alliance. The Hojo household, serving as Yoritomo's most reliable counselors, whose daughter Masako had wed the shogun, acted swiftly to preserve the Kamakura structure while securing their own role within it. Hojo Tokimasa, Masako's father, assumed the newly established shikan or regent position, effectively managing governmental operations while preserving Minamoto rule fiction. This arrangement reflected medieval Japanese politics' complex legitimacy demands, where actual authority often functioned through ceremonial power layers and delegation. The Hojo regency confronted immediate opposition from rival warrior households, expecting greater compensation for their Genpei war service. The Wada family, controlling substantial military forces in the Kanto territory, openly questioned whether the Hojo possessed adequate martial credentials to command the warrior administration. These pressures exploded into open warfare during the Kenin Rebellion of 1203, when Yorie attempted asserting direct authority over military selections and property grants. The uprising revealed fundamental instability plaguing early Kamakura governance. Yorie's supporters included many accomplished military leaders from the Genpei conflict, men earning positions through battlefield excellence rather than administrative expertise. Yet their individual martial superiority couldn't compensate for the Hojo family's superior governmental understanding and careful institutional loyalty cultivation among middle-ranking officials. The critical confrontation occurred not through dramatic battlefield encounters, but through political maneuvers isolating Yorai from his power foundation. The establishment of this warrior government marked the end of court dominance and the beginning of Japan's Age of the Sword, a transformation that would echo through centuries of Japanese history. The organizational excellence of the Hojo structure became especially clear in managing intricate property ownership arrangements that developed during the late Heian era. The multiplication of private domains, taxation exemptions, and conflicting jurisdictions had generated legal chaos that imperial administration couldn't solve. Kamakura administrators, utilizing comprehensive surveys and uniform procedures, methodically resolved ownership rights and removed numerous contradictions that had frozen previous reform efforts. This governmental capability attracted backing from warrior households across Japan, who had grown irritated with imperial courts' random and ineffective processes. The Kamakura regime provided reliable legal systems, achievement-based promotion chances, and security from court aristocrats' unpredictable requirements. These practical advantages proved more appealing to most fighters than ceremonial recognition and cultural status that the Kyoto court offered. Yet Hojo administrative success also generated fresh difficulties that would eventually endanger the complete system's stability. Power concentration within one family created bitterness among other warrior clans feeling excluded from meaningful governmental participation. The Hojo solution involved establishing extra bureaucratic levels and expanding official positions, but these actions failed addressing core power distribution issues. Economic abundance characterizing much of the early Kamakura era concealed underlying structural difficulties becoming severe during crisis periods. The warrior regime's financial foundation depended heavily on farming taxes and transaction fees from property sales. This income source proved sufficient during peaceful times and normal harvests, but lacked flexibility needed for extraordinary expenses like massive military expeditions. The initial serious examination of this financial structure arrived with the Mongol invasions during the late 13th century. The Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan following Mongol conquest of Song China, had unified the Chinese mainland and Korean peninsula under singular imperial control for the first time in generations. This consolidation generated unprecedented military and economic resources, enabling Mongols to consider overseas expansion on scales no previous Chinese dynasty attempted. Kublai Khan's opening diplomatic approaches to Japan in 1268 reflected standard Mongol procedures for incorporating fresh territories into their empire. The Khan's message, delivered through Korean representatives, demanded Japanese recognition of Mongol authority and tribute payments exchanged for protection and commercial benefits. The communications language, while following diplomatic traditions, contained implicit warnings clarifying rejection consequences. The Hojo regent's choice to disregard these diplomatic efforts represented a crucial miscalculation of Mongol capabilities and objectives. Japanese commanders, isolated geographically and lacking recent continental warfare experience, failed comprehending the military resource scale that the Yuan dynasty could mobilize against them. Their confidence stemmed largely from successful opposition to earlier Chinese and Korean invasions during the 7th century, conflicts bearing little similarity to the coordinated assault Kublai Khan planned. The first Mongol invasion armada departed Korean harbours in November 1274 with roughly 900 ships transporting 23,000 Mongol and Korean soldiers alongside their mounts, siege machinery and extended campaign supplies. This fleet represented the largest amphibious operation attempted in East Asian waters until that period, requiring months of preparation and resource mobilization from throughout the Mongol Empire. The invasion initially targeted Tsushima and Iki Islands, serving as bridges between Korea and Kyushu. These remote outpost defenders, totaling fewer than 200 fighters, battled with frantic valor, but were swiftly overwhelmed by superior numbers and unknown weaponry. Mongol forces utilized Chinese-manufactured crossbows, explosive devices, and coordinated infantry methods, proving devastatingly effective against traditional Japanese mounted archery. The primary Mongol landing happened at Hakata Bay on Kyushu's northwestern shore, where regional warriors had gathered to oppose the invasion. Japanese defenders, led by Shimazu, Otomo, and Kikuchi family members, numbered roughly 10,000 mounted fighters supported by foot soldiers and local militia groups. Their tactical methods reflected generations of individual combat and small unit experience, but proved insufficient against invaders' disciplined formations and coordinated strategies. The Hakata Bay battle revealed critical flaws in traditional samurai combat that would force comprehensive tactical transformations during following decades. Despite technological and strategic disadvantages, Japanese defenders caused significant enemy losses through desperate bravery and detailed local geographical knowledge, ultimately forcing the Mongol withdrawal and preserving Japan's independence through a combination of military resistance and environmental factors that would become legendary in Japanese history. Mongol generals skilled in continental combat severely underestimated the logistical nightmares involved in amphibious assaults against fortified shorelines. The aftermath of the first invasion created a confidence crisis within the Kamakura administration that would generate enduring consequences for the warrior elite. The Hojo Regency had successfully coordinated Kyushu's defense, but mobilizing forces from throughout Japan and maintaining them in constant readiness drained the government's financial reserves. More problematically, the established system of compensating military service through territorial grants proved impossible to implement since defenders had protected existing lands rather than conquering fresh territories. This inability to provide concrete rewards for military duty violated core expectations of the warrior class and generated widespread resentment among families who had shouldered significant expenses preparing for and participating in the defense campaign. Numerous warriors had liquidated property or borrowed money to outfit themselves and their followers for the expedition, anticipating recovering these investments through conquered land distribution. The absence of such compensation left them in worse financial circumstances than before the invasion attempts. The Hojo solution to these grievances involved establishing fresh administrative roles and ceremonial titles, but these actions failed addressing the fundamental economic difficulties confronting the warrior class. The expanding monetization of Japanese commerce during the late Kamakura era had generated new wealth forms and expenses that the traditional land-based reward structure couldn't accommodate. Warriors required cash to purchase imported weapons and equipment, but the government lacked systems for producing and distributing monetary compensation. Kublai Khan's determination to launch a second invasion reflected both his resolve to complete Japan's conquest and his confidence that lessons learned from the first campaign would guarantee success. The Yuan dynasty had spent 6 years preparing for this offensive, constructing fresh vessels specifically designed for amphibious warfare and assembling forces from across the Mongol Empire. The preparation scale dwarfed the earlier invasion and represented one of medieval history's largest military undertakings. The Second Invasion Armada departing in 1281 consisted of 2 separate fleets intended to converge on Kyushu from different directions. The Eastern Route Army, launching from Korean harbours, included approximately 40,000 Mongol, Korean and Northern Chinese soldiers transported in 900 vessels. The Southern Route Army, departing from southern China ports, carried 100,000 troops, primarily former Song Chinese fighters in over 300 ships of various sizes. This massive enterprise required unprecedented coordination between different Mongol Empire regions and demonstrated the administrative capabilities that enabled the Yuan dynasty to govern the world's largest contiguous empire. The logistics of assembling, equipping and transporting such enormous forces across hundreds of ocean miles represented military organizational achievements that wouldn't be surpassed until the modern era. Japanese response to this second invasion revealed significant improvements in both defensive preparations and tactical doctrine. The Kamakura government had utilized the intervening years to construct fortifications along the Kyushu coastline, including a stone barrier extending several kilometers along Hakata Bay. This defensive wall, built through labor mobilization from across western Japan, represented a fundamental shift from the mobile defense tactics characterizing the first invasion. More importantly, Japanese warriors had adapted their combat methods to address tactical challenges revealed during the earlier conflict. They abandoned individual fighting techniques that proved ineffective against coordinated enemy formations and developed fresh approaches emphasizing coordinated unit actions and terrain utilization to offset enemy advantages in equipment and numbers. Successful defense against the Second Mongol invasion had exhausted the Kamakura government's financial reserves and exposed fundamental reward system weaknesses that would prove impossible to resolve. By the early 14th century, the Hojo Regency faced mounting pressure from warrior families who had received neither compensation for their military service nor adequate protection from economic hardships plaguing much of Japan. The increasing economy monetization had created fresh debt forms and financial obligations that the traditional land-based governance system couldn't address effectively. Emperor Go-Daigo's accession to the throne in 1318 coincided with this growing crisis of warrior confidence in the Kamakura system. Unlike his predecessors who had accepted their ceremonial role within the dual structure of imperial and military authority, Go-Daigo possessed genuine political ambitions and sophisticated understanding of weaknesses plaguing the Hojo government. His court attracted disaffected warriors, ambitious courtiers, and Buddhist monks sharing grievances against the established order. The emperor's initial attempts at direct rule, known as the Kenmu Restoration, began with careful preparation and coalition building, demonstrating considerable political skill. Go-Daigo recognized that successful rebellion required more than imperial legitimacy. It needed military force capable of defeating professional warriors serving the Kamakura government. His recruitment efforts focused on warrior families excluded from Hojo patronage networks and younger sons of established clans facing limited advancement prospects under the existing system. The Genko War erupted in 1321 when Go-Daigo's conspiracy was discovered by Kamakura intelligence networks. The emperor's flight to Mount Kasagi, where he established a fortified position defended by warrior monks from nearby Enryakuji Temple, marked the beginning of conflict that would fundamentally transform Japanese political structures. The mountain stronghold, protected by steep approaches and dense forests, provided an ideal base for guerrilla warfare tactics that would characterize much of the subsequent fighting. The Hojo response to this imperial rebellion revealed the extent to which their military capabilities had deteriorated during peaceful decades following the Mongol invasions. Warrior families who had once provided reliable military service had become increasingly independent and reluctant to commit substantial resources to campaigns offering little prospect of material reward. Many regional strongmen adopted positions of cautious neutrality, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious before committing their forces. The siege of Mount Kasagi demonstrated both strengths and limitations of traditional Japanese siege warfare. The attacking forces led by Hojo loyalists possessed overwhelming numerical superiority, but lacked specialized equipment and techniques necessary for reducing fortified positions. Their attempts to storm the mountain defenses resulted in heavy casualties and minimal territorial gains, while defenders used their elevated positions and local terrain knowledge to inflict disproportionate losses on attackers. Emperor Go-Daigo's capture in 1302, achieved through treachery rather than military assault, appeared to end the rebellion and restore Hojo authority. However, the emperor's subsequent exile to the Oki Islands created a powerful resistance symbol that attracted additional supporters to the imperial cause. More significantly, his absence from the capital allowed ambitious military commanders to claim they were acting in his name while pursuing their own territorial and political objectives. Kusunoki Masashige emerged during this period as the most innovative and effective of the imperial military commanders. A brilliant tactician and strategist, his cunning defense of two key loyalist fortresses at Akasaka and Chihaya helped allow Go-Daigo to briefly return to power, fundamentally altering the course of Japanese history and setting the stage for centuries of warrior dominance that would follow. Operating from fortified strongholds in the mountainous territories south of Kyoto, he crafted tactical methods that maximized defensive terrain benefits while minimizing enemy numerical advantage impact. His fortress at Chihaya, built on a precipitous hillside with meticulously prepared death zones and hidden positions, became a defensive architecture model that would shape Japanese military engineering for generations. The siege of Chihaya in 1333 revealed the tactical obsolescence of traditional Kamakura military philosophy. Attacking forces using conventional methods that emphasize mounted assaults and individual duels found themselves unable to achieve meaningful advancement against defenders utilizing coordinated archery, concealed locations, and precisely timed counterstrikes. Masashige's troops employed deception, nighttime raids, and psychological combat to demoralize their adversaries and create impressions of supernatural support for the imperial movement. Ashikaga Takauji's defection represented the critical turning point in the Genko conflict and the beginning of Kamakura authority's end. Takauji, a member of a secondary Minamoto clan branch, had initially served the Hojo administration loyally and commanded substantial military forces in the Eastern Territories. His choice to join the imperial movement reflected both personal ambition and calculated evaluation that the Kamakura structure could no longer provide effective governance or sufficient rewards for military duty. Takauji's allegiance shift triggered a defection cascade that rapidly undermined Hojo military capabilities throughout Japan. Regional power brokers who had awaited clear indication of which faction would triumph began declaring for the imperial movement, bringing substantial armed forces and strategic territorial control. This collapse of speed demonstrated that Hojo power had been maintained more through custom and tradition than through genuine loyalty or effective administration. Kamakura's fall in 1333 marked the first warrior government's termination and the beginning of complex political experimentation lasting over 2 centuries. The Hojo stronghold's destruction involved systematic burning of governmental buildings, temples, and residential complexes that had housed the warrior elite for nearly 50 years. Contemporary records describe smoke from these fires as visible from distances exceeding 30 kilometers, symbolizing the old order's complete elimination. Emperor Go-Daigo's return to Kyoto and direct imperial rule establishment initially appeared to fulfill the anti-Kamakura coalition's objectives. However, the emperor's centralized government vision, based on Chinese models, proved incompatible with 14th century Japan's decentralized realities. His attempts to restore court-based administration and reduce warrior family influence alienated many military leaders who had enabled his victory. The Kenmu Restoration's failure to address fundamental problems that had undermined the Kamakura structure became apparent within months of its establishment. The emperor's administration lacked both financial resources and administrative machinery necessary to govern Japan's diverse regions effectively. More critically, Go-Daigo's emphasis on court ceremony and Chinese-inspired bureaucracy ignored practical needs of the warrior class that had become Japanese society's dominant force. Ashikaga Takauji's rebellion against the imperial government in 1335 reflected both personal ambition and genuine disagreement about proper Japanese governance structure. Takauji argued that effective rule required warrior family participation and recognition of their legitimate interests in land ownership and military command. His political program, while self-serving, addressed real concerns about purely court-based government sustainability in a society fundamentally transformed by over a century of warrior rule. The conflict between Takauji and imperial forces led by Nitta Yoshisada created conditions for the complex period known as Nanboku-cho, or the Northern and Southern Courts era. This division occurred when Go-Daigo fled Kyoto with imperial regalia and established an alternative court in the mountainous Yoshino region south of the capital. Takauji, meanwhile, installed a rival emperor from a different imperial family branch and established his military headquarters in Kyoto. Two competing imperial courts' existence created unprecedented legitimacy problems that divided warrior families throughout Japan. Unlike previous conflicts where rival claimants represented different branches of the same political system, the northern and southern courts embodied fundamentally different governance approaches and the relationship between imperial authority and warrior power. This ideological dimension gave the conflict an intensity and duration that purely dynastic disputes rarely achieved. Support geographical distribution for each court reflected underlying regional differences developing throughout the Kamakura period. The southern court attracted support primarily from central Japan's mountainous regions, where warrior families had maintained greater independence from Kamakura authority and possessed strong traditions of resistance to centralized control. The northern court, backed by Ashikaga military power, dominated plains regions and major population centers, where effective governance required administrative efficiency and economic coordination. Nanboku-cho period military campaigns were characterized by their extended duration and inconclusive results. Unlike earlier conflicts' decisive battles, engagements during this era typically involved prolonged sieges, guerrilla warfare, and shifting alliances that prevented either side from achieving permanent victory. Central Japan's mountainous terrain favored defensive tactics and made it extremely difficult for either court to eliminate its rival completely. Ashikaga Takauji's establishment of his shogunate in 1338 represented an attempt to create fresh synthesis between imperial legitimacy and warrior governance. Unlike the Kamakura systems, which had maintained the fiction of serving the emperor while exercising independent authority, the Ashikaga shogunate sought explicit imperial recognition for its governmental functions. This approach reflected both Takauji's political sophistication and his understanding that sustainable authority required some form of ceremonial legitimacy. The Ashikaga governmental system centered in Kyoto, rather than a separate military capital, represented a fundamental departure from Kamakura precedents. By establishing their headquarters in the imperial capital, the Ashikaga shoguns positioned themselves as partners rather than rivals of court nobility. This arrangement created opportunities for cultural exchange and political cooperation, but also exposed the warrior government to factional disputes and ceremonial obligations that had paralyzed earlier, court-based administrations. Shugo daimyo system development under Ashikaga rule reflected both practical necessity and conscious policy choices, with profound consequences for Japanese political development. The Shugo, originally appointed as temporary provincial governors with limited authority, gradually evolved into powerful regional lords exercising comprehensive territorial control. This transformation occurred partly through deliberate Ashikaga policy, granting expanded powers to loyal supporters, and partly through practical requirements of governing during continuous warfare. The Shugo daimyo differed fundamentally from earlier provincial authority forms in both power scope and central government relationship. Unlike Kamakura-era governors who served primarily as military commanders and tax collectors, the Shugo daimyo exercised judicial, administrative, and economic functions, making them virtually independent rulers within their domains. They maintained personal armies, collected taxes, administered justice, and conducted diplomatic relations with neighbouring territories. This authority decentralization created a complex political landscape where effective power was distributed among dozens of regional strongmen owing nominal allegiance to the Ashikaga shogun, but pursuing personal interests when those conflicted with central government policy. The shogun's authority depended on maintaining a coalition of these powerful lords through rewards, threats, and diplomatic maneuvering requiring constant attention and considerable resources. The Onin War erupting in 1467 represented the culmination of tensions building within the Ashikaga system for over a century, transforming Japan into a realm where power would flow from the edge of swords for generations to come. The brutal campaigns of the Onin conflict were distinguished by their catastrophic effects on Kyoto and adjacent territories. Rather than previous wars involving fluid expeditions across extensive geographical zones, most combat during this struggle happened within the capital itself, where opposing forces built defensive works and participated in building-to-building battles that obliterated urban foundations. Historical records detail complete neighbourhoods transformed into cinders and debris, with major religious complexes and noble mansions experiencing total annihilation. The strategic advances emerging during the Onin conflict mirrored both the metropolitan setting where substantial fighting took place and the evolving social makeup of Japanese military units. The Shugo daimyo progressively depended on Ashigaru infantry rather than conventional cavalry fighters, demonstrating both financial factors and siege combat's tactical demands. These career foot soldier formations, armed with pikes, ballistas, and primitive guns, proved superior to horsemen in cramped areas and fortified locations defining metropolitan warfare. Firearm arrival in Japan during 1543 through Portuguese merchants constituted a technological transformation that would completely reshape Japanese combat during the concluding decades of Ashikaga rule. Initial arquebus exhibitions performed on Tanegashima Island disclosed both capabilities and restrictions of these revolutionary armaments. Though early guns possessed superior armor-piercing strength compared to traditional longbows and demanded minimal preparation for effective usage, they remained sluggish to refresh, undependable during rainfall, and generated vapor revealing the marksman's location. Japanese artisans, celebrated for their metalworking expertise, rapidly dominated manufacturing methods required for domestic firearm production. Within 10 years of introduction, Japanese manufactured arquebuses were being created in volume surpassing European production capacity. This swift acceptance demonstrated both Japanese metalworkers' technical excellence and pressing military requirements generated by Sengoku period's continuous combat. Firearm integration's tactical consequences extended beyond simple weapon replacement. Musket volleys' effectiveness demanded fresh military organization and instruction forms, emphasizing formation cooperation rather than personal skill. Infantry units equipped with firearms required cavalry charge protection and coordination with alternative weapon systems for maximum efficiency. These demands contributed to developing more intricate military hierarchies and specialized command frameworks. Fortress design experienced dramatic transformation during this era, responding to both firearm technology and siege warfare's changing character. Traditional wooden barriers and earthwork defences characterising earlier protective systems proved insufficient against artillery and prolonged bombardment. Japanese military architects developed advanced stone construction methods, creating defensive networks capable of resisting both conventional assault and gunpowder weaponry. The Sengoku period's emergence around 1477 signalled the beginning of an unprecedented military innovation and political fragmentation era, continuing until late 16th century national reunification. Effective Ashikaga authorities' collapse generated opportunities for ambitious territorial leaders to expand their domains and influence through military conquest. This competitive atmosphere stimulated rapid advancement in military technology, tactical philosophy, and governmental administration as survival depended on maintaining advantages over competitors. Centralized Ashikaga power's breakdown following the Onin conflict created a leadership void that determined regional strongmen quickly exploited. By 1477, Japan had splintered into numerous independent domains controlled by Sengoku daimyo, owing no meaningful loyalty to the weakened Ashikaga shogunate in Kyoto. These commanders, arising from diverse backgrounds including former Shugo households, accomplished military leaders, and even prosperous traders who had acquired warrior rank, shared common traits distinguishing them from predecessors. Through ruthless practicality, inventive military reasoning, and sophisticated economic warfare understanding, the Sengoku daimyo transformed Japanese military structure through systematic professionalization of their armed forces. Unlike traditional warrior groups depending on seasonal expeditions and part-time soldiers returning to farming duties during planting and harvest periods, these fresh military chiefs maintained permanent armies, equipped and prepared for continuous operations. These forces' foundation comprised professional Ashigaru foot soldiers recruited from peasant classes and supplied with uniform equipment, consistent wages, and rigorous preparation and coordinated methods. This military transformation required corresponding innovations in logistics and supply networks. The Sengoku daimyo established complex supply depot systems, weapons manufacturing facilities, and transportation networks sustaining armies during extended field operations. They created armories within their fortress towns where expert craftsmen manufactured weapons following uniform specifications, guaranteeing compatibility and maintenance simplicity. These production centers simultaneously functioned as instruction facilities where young fighters learned not only individual combat abilities but also complex coordination necessary for the effective unit operations. The financial foundation supporting these military innovations depended on thorough territorial resource exploitation through enhanced agricultural methods, expanded trade, and systematic revenue collection. The Sengoku daimyo implemented property assessments accurately evaluating agricultural output, enabling them to maximize tax income while preserving peasant productivity. They promoted technological improvements including new grain varieties, superior irrigation networks, and more efficient farming implements, increasing yields and supporting larger populations. Oda Nobunaga emerged from this competitive environment as the most inventive and accomplished among the Sengoku daimyo. Though his initial status hardly suggested future supremacy, the Oda clan controlled merely a section of Owari province surrounded by stronger neighbours who initially dismissed Nobunaga as an unconventional young ruler whose unusual conduct violated traditional warrior customs. His habit of wearing foreign garments, associating with merchants and foreigners, and disregarding ceremonial procedures led many peers to underestimate his strategic abilities and military capability. Nobunaga's first significant triumph at Okahazama Battle in 1560 revealed the tactical innovations characterizing his complete career. Imagawa Yoshimoto, among eastern Japan's most formidable daimyo, had gathered approximately 25,000 soldiers for a Kyoto march that would have established Imagawa control over central Japan. The Imagawa troops, confident in their numerical advantage and Yoshimoto's military commander reputation, established camp in a confined valley during torrential rainfall, assuming weather would prevent serious attacks. Nobunaga's reaction violated every traditional samurai warfare principle. Rather than accepting his situation's hopelessness or attempting to negotiate conditions, he assembled fewer than 3,000 troops and initiated a surprise offensive during the storm's peak. His forces, moving through mountain routes enemies hadn't bothered guarding, achieved complete tactical surprise by striking the Imagawa headquarters directly, rather than engaging the primary army. The coordinated assault, timed to coincide with lightning strikes creating additional chaos, resulted in Yoshimoto's death and complete Imagawa regional authority collapse. The Okehazama victory established Nobunaga's tactical brilliance reputation and demonstrated his willingness to employ unconventional methods traditional warriors considered dishonorable. His utilization of detailed intelligence networks, precise timing, and force concentration against enemy vulnerabilities became his strategic approach. Hallmarks, setting the stage for Japan's eventual reunification under warrior rule. More crucially, the engagement disclosed his comprehension that conclusive triumph demanded enemy command elimination, rather than gradual weakening characterizing most contemporary battles. Nobunaga's following expeditions against Buddhist warrior monasteries constituted perhaps his most disputed yet strategically essential operations. The massive temple establishments of Mount Hiei, Ishiyama Honganji, and Nagoroji had transformed into independent military authorities controlling vast domains and sustaining armies capable of confronting secular powers. These religious organizations, shielded by their holy reputation and backed by affiliate temple networks throughout Japan, constituted barriers to centralized control that no unification attempt could overlook. The Ishiyama Honganji blockade, extending from 1570 to 1580, revealed both Buddhist institutions' military strength and Nobunaga's resolve to destroy all autonomous power centers. The fortress temple, built on a strategic location overlooking Osaka Bay, possessed advanced defensive structures incorporating both traditional Japanese design and European-influenced artillery emplacements. The defending monks, aided by thousands of armed peasant devotees called Iko-Iki, utilized firearms, cannons, and coordinated infantry methods rivaling professional military units. Nobunaga's siege strategy demonstrated his methodical warfare approach combining military force with economic blockade and psychological terror. His troops built fortified position networks surrounding the temple compound, severing supply routes and blocking reinforcements. Concurrently, he arranged agreements with Portuguese merchants providing his forces with superior weapons and explosives while preventing these materials from reaching adversaries. The siege additionally featured extensive naval unit deployment controlling access paths through Osaka Bay, showing Nobunaga's grasp of integrated combat operations. The Enryakuji temple complex destruction on Mount Hiei in 1571 stunned contemporaries through its completeness and apparent blasphemy. Nobunaga's army, totaling roughly 30,000 soldiers, methodically incinerated every structure within temple grounds and executed virtually every resident, including monks, attendants, women, and children. This deed, unparalleled in Japanese history for its magnitude and savagery, accomplished multiple strategic objectives: eliminating military danger, illustrating resistance consequences, and establishing Nobunaga's ruthless reputation, deterring future opposition. The tactical advances Nobunaga brought to Japanese combat extended beyond simple firearm adoption to include fundamental shifts in military structure and battlefield philosophy. His forces employed coordinated arquebus formations protected by pikemen and supported by cavalry units trained for specific tactical functions rather than individual duels. These arrangements demanded extensive preparation and discipline, transforming warfare from personal combat series into coordinated unit operations directed by professional commanders. The Nagakute battle in 1584, fought following Nobunaga's death, demonstrated how thoroughly his innovations had revolutionized Japanese military practice. The engagement involving forces loyal to Toyotomi Hideyoshi and those supporting Tokugawa Ieyasu featured complex tactical movements impossible with traditional warrior groups. Both armies employed coordinated infantry formations, artillery assistance, and cavalry attacks timed to exploit enemy vulnerabilities created by firearm salvos. The battle's result depended on superior coordination and tactical adaptability, rather than individual martial excellence. Nobunaga's employment of professional armies instead of traditional warrior levies represented a core transformation in Japanese military power's social foundation. His forces included numerous ashigaru recruited from peasant classes and equipped with uniform gear and steady wages. These career soldiers, liberated from farming duties and trained exclusively for combat, proved more dependable and efficient than part-time fighters dividing attention between military service and economic pursuits. The supply systems supporting these professional forces required unprecedented organizational levels and resource management. Nobunaga established supply depot networks throughout his domains connected by enhanced roads enabling rapid troop and equipment movement. His quartermasters developed uniform procedures for field army provisioning, including portable cooking apparatus, preserved provisions, and medical supplies, maintaining combat effectiveness during prolonged campaigns. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's advancement from Ashigaru foot soldier to supreme military leader illustrated both social advancement possible during the Sengoku period and administrative talent's significance in managing complex military operations. His early service under Nobunaga involved primarily logistical duties, but his exceptional organizational capabilities and strategic vision earned him increasing control over military planning and execution. Following Nobunaga's death in 1582, Hideyoshi's swift crisis response and successful rival elimination demonstrated his mastery of both military and political combat. The Shizugatake battle in 1583 established Hideyoshi's supremacy over potential competitors within the former Oda alliance. Shibata Katsue, Nobunaga's most experienced commander, had gathered a formidable force and occupied strong defensive positions, seemingly guaranteeing victory over Hideyoshi's apparently inferior troops. Yet Hideyoshi's campaign revealed the tactical flexibility and strategic deception characterizing his unification approach. His renowned forced march, covering over 50 kilometers in one day to achieve tactical surprise, and enabled him to concentrate superior numbers against isolated enemy positions before they could receive assistance. Shizugatake's tactical execution showed how completely Japanese warfare had evolved from traditional patterns. Both armies employed coordinated arquebus, spear, and cavalry formations operating according to predetermined battle schemes, rather than responding to battlefield developments through individual initiative. The decisive phase involved precisely timed attacks by multiple units, creating overwhelming pressure at specific enemy line points, forcing complete collapse rather than gradual retreat. Hideyoshi's continuation of Nobunaga's unification program required military method adaptation, addressing different strategic challenges. While Nobunaga had focused primarily on eliminating independent power centers within central Japan, Hideyoshi confronted the more complex task of integrating diverse regional authorities into a unified national structure. This demanded not only military conquest but also diplomatic negotiation, economic incentives, and administrative reforms addressing potential allies' legitimate concerns. The Odawara siege in 1580s demonstrated Hideyoshi's siege warfare mastery and his ability to coordinate massive military operations involving over 200,000 troops drawn from across Japan. The Hojo clan's Odawara fortress, constructed according to the most advanced defensive principles and supplied for extended resistance, represented Sengoku period castle architecture's culmination. The defensive network included multiple concentric walls, sophisticated artillery positions, and underground passages enabling defenders to launch surprise strikes against besieging forces. Hideyoshi's siege approach combined overwhelming force with innovative tactical methods neutralizing defenders' advantages. His engineers constructed elaborate siege works, including artificial hills providing elevated firing positions, covered approaches protecting attacking forces, and diversion tunnels designed to undermine the castle's foundations. The siege also featured extensive naval force utilization, preventing supply deliveries and psychological warfare designed to demoralize defenders through superior resource and determination demonstrations. National unification's completion through the Odawara campaign marked a fundamental Japanese political organization transformation, ending nearly 2 centuries of fragmented authority, setting the stage for Japan's next great adventure, the ambitious but ultimately failed Korean invasions that would test the limits of this newly unified military machine. Chinese forces, structured according to mainland principles and armed with cannon systems exceeding Japanese armaments, demanded fresh tactical methods, emphasizing defensive stances and coordinated firearm barrages rather than aggressive offensive strategies that had succeeded during unification expeditions. The Pyongyang blockade in 1593 revealed tactical difficulties confronting Japanese troops when facing professional Chinese forces supported by advanced artillery. The Chinese Relief Army, commanded by Li Rusong, employed siege cannons and coordinated infantry strikes, forcing Japanese defenders to evacuate positions previously considered unassailable. The Japanese retreat from Pyongyang signaled the start of strategic deadlock characterizing the remaining Korean expeditions. The Korean invasion's influence on Japanese military advancement extended beyond immediate tactical education to include fundamental shifts in strategic reasoning and international diplomacy. The expeditions revealed Japanese naval capability restrictions and stimulated innovations in vessel design and maritime tactics influencing oceanic warfare for decades. More significantly, the experience battling Chinese and Korean armies provided Japanese military commanders with continental military method knowledge, proving valuable in future conflicts. The financial expenses of maintaining large forces in Korea for over 6 years strained even the most powerful daimyo domain's resources and contributed to economic instability affecting domestic politics throughout Hideyoshi's remaining reign. The necessity to sustain overseas forces while simultaneously defending Japanese territories against potential Chinese retaliation compelled military leaders to develop fresh resource allocation and strategic planning approaches, balancing competing priorities. Hideyoshi's death in 1598 and subsequent Korean withdrawal created a leadership void ambitious daimyo quickly exploited. The complex regency structure established to govern during his son's minority proved incapable of maintaining unity among great lords, many emerging from Korean campaigns with enhanced military capabilities and diminished respect for central authority. Competing coalition formation around Tokugawa Ieyasu and Ishida Mitsunari reflected both personal ambitions and fundamental disagreements about proper Japanese governance structure. The Sekigahara battle in 1600 represented the culmination of tensions building since Hideyoshi's death and established Tokugawa clan dominance over Japan for the next 2.5 centuries. The engagement, involving over 60,000 fighters divided between Eastern and Western armies, demonstrated how completely Sengoku period military innovations had transformed Japanese combat. Both sides employed coordinated firearm, artillery, and cavalry formations operating according to sophisticated battle schemes requiring extensive preparation and professional leadership for effective execution. The Tokugawa shogunate establishment at Edo, following Ieyasu's decisive Sekigahara victory, marked the beginning of samurai history's most profound transformation. Unlike the Kamakura and Ashikaga systems maintaining the warrior class's fundamental military function while adapting to changing political circumstances, the Tokugawa regime deliberately restructured samurai society serving centralized governance and permanent peace needs. This transformation began immediately after 1603 when Ieyasu received the shogun title and initiated policies systematically converting Japan's warrior elite from independent military commanders into bureaucratic administrators serving a highly centralized state. The Sankin Kotai system, formally codified in 1635 under 3rd shogun Tokugawa Ieyamitsu, represented this transformation's cornerstone. The policy required all daimyo to maintain permanent Edo residences and spend alternate years attending the shogunal court while their wives and heirs remained as permanent hostages in the capital. This arrangement served multiple strategic purposes extending beyond simple control mechanisms. The constant daimyo retinue movement between their domains and Edo created a massive internal economy centered on transportation, accommodation, and luxury goods, redirecting warrior spending from military preparations towards ceremonial display and conspicuous consumption. Sankin Kotai's practical implementation required daimyo to maintain elaborate processions, including several hundred retainers, servants, and guards depending on their domain's assessed value. These processions, strictly regulated by shogunal law regarding route selection, stopping points, and ceremonial protocols, transformed to Japan's road network into a carefully monitored control system. The Tokaido Nakasendoya and other major highways became stages for ritualized submission displays to Tokugawa authority, where each daimyo's procession demonstrated both his wealth and acceptance of his subordinate position within the national hierarchy. Sankin Kotai's economic burden proved devastating to daimyo finances and fundamentally altered lord-retainer relationships. Maintaining dual residences, supporting large retinues in expensive Edo, and funding elaborate processions consumed enormous resources previously available for military purposes. Many domains spent between 30 and 50% of annual revenues on Sankin Kotai obligations, forcing them to reduce samurai retainer band sizes and convert military stipends into administrative salaries for much smaller bureaucratic official numbers. This financial pressure accelerated samurai transformation from independent warriors into stipended retainers whose livelihoods depended entirely on their lord's continued favour and domain administrative system stability. Unlike the Sengoku period when ambitious warriors could advance through military service or by switching allegiance to more successful commanders, the Tokugawa system offered no legitimate social mobility opportunities through martial prowess. Samurai advancement required bureaucratic skill mastery, legal procedure knowledge, and competence in complex ceremonial protocols governing interactions between different social hierarchy levels. The four-class system implementation known as Shinokosho provided the ideological framework justifying this transformation, while maintaining samurai privilege within a fundamentally altered social structure. This hierarchy, derived from Chinese Confucian political theory, placed samurai at society's apex as the administrative class responsible for governance and moral leadership. Below them, farmers occupied the second position as the productive class whose agricultural labour supported the entire social system. Artisans ranked third as useful goods creators, while merchants, despite obvious wealth and practical importance, were relegated to the bottom as parasitic price manipulators contributing nothing of intrinsic societal value. The theoretical samurai status elevation within the system masked their practical independence and military function loss. While Confucian ideology emphasized the warrior class's responsibility for moral cultivation and administrative competence, Shinokosho's actual implementation created rigid boundaries preventing social mobility and trapping samurai within increasingly obsolete roles. The system's emphasis on hereditary status rather than individual merit meant incompetent samurai retained positions while talented individuals from lower classes couldn't advance regardless of abilities. Non-samurai weapon-carrying prohibition, enforced through periodic sword hunts and strict registration requirements, maintained symbolic distinction between the warrior class and society's remainder even as martial skills' practical significance diminished. Samurai retained exclusive rights to wear two swords, the katana and wakizashi, serving as visible elevated status markers and theoretical military service readiness. However, actual weapon use became increasingly ceremonial, with most samurai possessing only basic sword skills and no actual combat experience. Samurai behavior codification through house codes known as kakun represented another crucial element in warrior culture transformation. These documents, produced by virtually every daimyo domain during the early Tokugawa period, established detailed regulations governing every samurai conduct aspect from dress and deportment to marriage arrangements and financial management. The Keikan served both practical and ideological functions, providing domain administrators with retainer control tools while articulating philosophical principles justifying samurai's continued privileged position. This systematic transformation of Japan's warrior class from battlefield fighters to bureaucratic administrators would define samurai identity for the next 250 years of peace, fundamentally altering the very essence of what it meant to be a samurai. The exemplary samurai portrayed in kakun and popular writings proved his value through steadfast dedication to his master, careful attention to governmental responsibilities, and development of cultural achievements including poetry, calligraphy, and tea ceremony. This archetype effectively directed warrior energies toward pursuits supporting rather than threatening the established political structure. Martial arts transformation from practical combat preparation into formalized systems of physical and spiritual discipline reflected broader changes affecting samurai traditions. The various swordsmanship, archery, and other military skill schools proliferating during the Tokugawa era emphasized character building and philosophical understanding rather than battlefield efficiency. These martial arts academies known as ryu developed complex theoretical structures connecting physical training with moral development and spiritual awakening, providing samurai with pursuits, maintaining their warrior identity while serving no practical military function. Economic difficulties confronting the samurai class became increasingly harsh as the Tokugawa period advanced, and Japan's economy grew more sophisticated and commercialized. The stipend structure replacing earlier land-granting practices to retainers created fundamental issues domain administrators struggled addressing throughout the era. Samurai stipends, typically paid in rice, remained fixed at levels established during the early 17th century, while goods and services costs continued rising due to population growth, urbanization, and increased commercial activity. Rice stipend conversion into cash payments implemented by many domains during the mid-Tokugawa period exposed samurai to market fluctuations they were poorly equipped to understand or manage. Rice prices varied significantly based on harvest conditions, regional supply and demand factors, and speculative activity by merchant traders who had developed sophisticated commodity market manipulation techniques. Samurai trained in administrative procedures and cultural accomplishments rather than commercial practices frequently found themselves at merchant creditors' mercy, who understood market mechanisms far better than their supposedly superior social betters. The prohibition against samurai engaging in commercial activities, enforced through legal restrictions and social stigma, prevented warriors from adapting to economic changes through entrepreneurial pursuits. While some samurai secretly invested in commercial ventures or worked as advisors to merchant enterprises, such activities violated ideological principles justifying their elevated social status. The Confucian emphasis on agricultural production's moral superiority over commercial manipulation meant samurai engaging in trade risked losing not only legal privileges, but also their social identity as warrior class members. Urban merchant community growth during the Tokugawa period created alternative wealth and influence centers challenging samurai assumptions about social hierarchy and economic relationships. Cities including Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto developed sophisticated commercial networks generating enormous profits for successful merchants while providing employment opportunities for displaced farmers and artisans. These urban centers operated according to market principles rewarding efficiency, innovation, and customer service rather than hereditary status or bureaucratic rank. Merchant community cultural achievements, particularly in literature, theatre, and visual arts, created alternative prestige and social recognition sources competing with traditional samurai culture. Kabuki theatre development, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and popular fiction reflected merchant tastes and values while attracting audiences from all social classes. These cultural forms celebrated commercial success, romantic love, and individual achievement in ways directly contradicting Confucian ideology, justifying samurai superiority. Increasing indebtedness of both individual samurai and entire domains created systemic problems threatening Tokugawa system stability. Many samurai borrowed money from wealthy merchants to maintain their social position's expected lifestyle, using stipends as collateral for loans often exceeding their repayment ability. Domain governments faced similar problems on larger scales, borrowing from merchant financiers to fund sankin-katai obligations, infrastructure projects and disaster relief while struggling to service debts from agricultural tax revenues remaining relatively static. Social tensions generated by these economic disparities became increasingly evident during the later Tokugawa period as impoverished samurai observed growing wealth and influence of merchant families theoretically occupying the social hierarchy's lowest position. The spectacle of debt-ridden warriors seeking loans from prosperous merchants living in luxury while maintaining humble public personas created cognitive dissonance, undermining confidence in the existing social order. Some samurai began questioning whether a system rewarding commercial success while impoverishing the warrior class truly reflected natural law and moral principles. Rangaku, or Dutch learning development during the 18th century, provided some samurai with access to Western scientific and technical knowledge, offering alternatives to traditional Chinese-derived scholarship. European medicine, astronomy, geography, and military technology study attracted intellectually curious samurai, recognizing conventional Confucian education's practical limitations. However, government restrictions on foreign contact and social stigma associated with excessive interest in barbarian knowledge limited these ideas' spread and their impact on samurai culture. Periodic reforms attempted by various shogunal administrations during the 18th century reflected growing recognition that economic problems facing the samurai class threatened the entire political system's stability. Kyoho reforms implemented by 8th shogun Tokugawa Yoshimune included measures designed to reduce government expenses, increase agricultural productivity, and provide debt relief for impoverished samurai. However, these efforts achieved only limited success because they failed addressing fundamental structural problems created by transforming warriors into bureaucratic administrators in an increasingly commercial economy. New forms of popular entertainment and consumer goods emergence during the mid-Tokugawa period created additional financial pressures on samurai families feeling obfuscated to participate in urban culture despite limited resources. Restaurant development, pleasure quarters, and commercial entertainment districts in major cities offered diversions requiring cash expenditures rather than rice-based transactions characterizing earlier periods. Samurai wishing to maintain social standing found themselves competing with wealthy merchants in consumption patterns their fixed stipends couldn't sustain. The education system developing during the Tokugawa period reflected both domain administration's practical needs and ideological requirements of maintaining samurai identity. Domain schools established throughout Japan during the 17th and 18th centuries provided samurai children with instruction in Confucian classics, calligraphy, arithmetic, and other subjects necessary for bureaucratic careers. However, this educational curriculum, while producing competent administrators, failed preparing samurai for economic challenges they would face as adults, or providing skills generating independent income. Domain administrative system. Increasing sophistication during the later Tokugawa period created opportunities for capable samurai to advance through bureaucratic hierarchies, but also intensified competition for desirable positions. Specialized administrative role development in finance, legal affairs, and foreign relations required technical expertise beyond traditional samurai education. Some domains began recruiting talented individuals from lower social classes to fill these positions, creating resentment among hereditary samurai, feeling their birthright privileges were being undermined by merit-based appointments. 5th Tokugawa shogun Tsunayoshi's ascension in 1680 coincided with Japan's emergence from economic instability and natural disasters plaguing the 17th century's middle decades. By 1688, the Genroku era's beginning, the nation had achieved prosperity and cultural sophistication levels unimaginable during the chaotic Sengoku period. Edo's population had swelled to over 1 million inhabitants, making it the world's largest city at that time, surpassing even London and Paris in both size and complexity. This massive urban centre had evolved beyond its military headquarters origins, becoming a sophisticated metropolis where samurai administrators, wealthy merchants, skilled artisans, and entertainment workers created vibrant society both celebrating and questioning traditional warrior values, marking the pinnacle of peaceful samurai civilization before the storms of modernization would forever change Japan. Fire prevention and emergency response systems, essential in a metropolis built mainly of timber and paper, comprised intricate networks of observation towers, firefighting units, and crisis procedures mobilizing complete neighborhoods against dangers. The cultural renaissance defining the Genroku era arose from the convergence of samurai sophistication, merchant prosperity, and urban refinement. The Yoshiwara pleasure districts, created as authorized zones for prostitution and entertainment, transformed into artistic innovation hubs where kabuki performers, courtesans, musicians, and authors developed fresh cultural expression forms appealing to audiences spanning social divisions. These areas, though officially isolated from respectable society, drew patrons from every social level seeking entertainment more immediate and emotionally compelling than formal cultural pursuits associated with traditional samurai civilization. Ukiyo-e woodblock printing emergence during this era revolutionized visual art distribution and established new cultural communication methods reaching audiences beyond traditional elites. Artists including Hishikawa Moronobu developed mass-production techniques for images depicting contemporary urban existence with unprecedented realism and artistic excellence. These prints, affordable to middle-class consumers, featured kabuki theatre scenes, renowned courtesan portraits, landscapes, and daily activities celebrating urban culture's vitality and diversity. The Genroku period's literary accomplishments reflected the intricate relationship between traditional samurai principles and contemporary urban life realities. Ihara Saikaku's novels, focusing on merchants, artisans, and pleasure seekers' lives, portrayed a world where success depended on intelligence, adaptability, and human nature comprehension, rather than hereditary status or martial excellence. His characters navigated complex social circumstances through wit and charm, achieving objectives through methods considered inappropriate or dishonorable, according to traditional warrior ethics. Bunraku puppet theatre development during this period provided another platform for exploring themes challenging conventional social assumptions. Chikamatsu Monzayemon's plays, combining historical subjects with contemporary social commentary, presented audiences with moral dilemmas lacking clear resolutions according to traditional ethical frameworks. His characters, whether historical figures or contemporary types, confronted conflicts between social duties and personal desires, reflecting tensions experienced by real people inhabiting an increasingly complex urban environment. The Akko incident of 1703 emerged from this cultural context as a real-life drama embodying fundamental tensions between legal obligation and traditional loyalty and honor concepts. This conflict's origins lay in complex ceremonial requirements governing interactions between daimyo and shogunal officials during formal court functions. Asano Naganori, the young Akko domain lord in Harima province, had been appointed to assist with preparations for receiving imperial envoys at Edo Castle, a responsibility requiring mastery of intricate protocols evolved over decades of Tokugawa rule. The specific incident triggering the crisis occurred during a formal ceremony in the Matsu no Roka, Edo Castle's Pine Corridor, where Asano drew his sword and attacked Kira Yoshinaka, the shogunal master of ceremonies responsible for instructing daimyo in proper protocols. The attack, resulting in minor wounds to Kira's face and head, violated the fundamental prohibition against drawing weapons within the shogun's residence and constituted an unprecedented castle security breach. Contemporary accounts suggest the assault resulted from accumulated frustration over Kira's demanding and allegedly corrupt behaviour during preparation periods, though their dispute's exact nature remains unclear. The shogunal response to this incident reflected legal principles and political priorities governing Tokugawa administration. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku the same day, his domain was confiscated, and his retainers were dismissed from service without warning or preparation. This swift punishment demonstrated the government's determination to maintain castle order and preserve ceremonial dignity, legitimizing shogunal authority. However, the decision to punish only Asano while taking no action against Kira, despite evidence he had contributed to the conflict, created injustice sense having profound consequences. Asano's former retainer's transformation into Ronin placed them in an impossible situation, highlighting Tokugawa social system contradictions. As masterless samurai, they had lost not only economic support but also social identity and legal status within the established hierarchy. Traditional warrior code demanded they avenge their lord's death and restore his honor, but any attempt would violate law and result in their own destruction. This dilemma reflected broader samurai society tensions between traditional values, emphasizing personal honor and loyalty, and legal requirements prioritizing social stability and government authority. Oishi Yoshio, the former Akko domain chief retainer, emerged as the leader of retainers choosing to pursue vengeance despite legal consequences. His careful planning over nearly 2 years demonstrated both strategic thinking, characterizing effective samurai leadership, and practical challenges facing any attempt to circumvent government security measures. Oishi recognized that success required not only careful conspirator coordination, but also deception sophisticated enough to avoid detection by extensive intelligence networks the Tokugawa government maintained throughout Edo. The elaborate deception Oishi employed to conceal his intentions involved adopting the lifestyle of a dissolute ronin who had abandoned samurai values favoring pleasure-seeking and self-indulgence. He frequented Yoshiwara district, engaged in public drinking and gambling, and behaved in ways violating every samurai conduct principle. This performance, maintained for months while secretly coordinating with other conspirators, required him to endure public humiliation and personal degradation, testing his commitment to the larger purpose. The psychological cost of this deception, involving betraying his own moral principles in service of higher loyalty, illustrated complex ethical calculations the incident forced upon participants. The assault on Kira's residence on December 14, 1702 morning demonstrated both military capabilities former samurai retained despite decades of peace and careful planning required for such operations in Edo's heavily regulated environment. The 47 conspirators, divided into two groups attacking from different directions, overcame guards and servants defending the compound through coordinated tactics reflecting their professional military training. The operation, completed in less than 2 hours, resulted in Kira's death and recovery of his head as proof their lord's honour had been restored. The vendetta's aftermath created a crisis for the Tokugawa government, exposing fundamental contradictions within official ideology. The Ronin had clearly violated law and deserved punishment according to legal principles, but their actions embodied loyalty and self-sacrifice the government promoted as essential samurai virtues. Public opinion expressed through popular literature, theatre, and informal discussion overwhelmingly supported the Ronin and viewed their actions as heroic examples of proper warrior behaviour. This popular response placed government officials in the difficult position of punishing behaviour most people considered admirable and morally correct. Extensive deliberations preceding the government's final decision reflected issues' complexity and recognition that resolution would establish important precedents for future cases. Discussions involving senior officials, legal scholars, and Confucian advisors explored questions about law and morality relationships, retainer obligations to deceased lords, and proper balance between social stability and traditional values. The final decision allowing Ronin to commit seppuku rather than executing them as common criminals represented a compromise, acknowledging their moral motivation while maintaining the principle that illegal actions must have consequences. The Akko incident's cultural impact extended far beyond immediate political implications to influence Japanese popular culture for centuries. The story, transformed through kabuki plays, bunraku performances, novels, and eventually films, became a foundational narrative exploring loyalty, sacrifice, and moral conflict themes, resonating with audiences across different historical periods. The 47 Ronin became cultural heroes whose actions provided behavioral models transcending their time's specific circumstances and offering guidance for individuals facing conflicts between competing moral obligations, perfectly embodying the eternal samurai struggle between duty and honour in an age of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The advancement of various Neo-Confucian thought academies during this era demonstrated both intellectual excellence and practical governance and social organization concerns. The Kimon Academy, established by Yamazaki Ansai, stressed rigid conformity to orthodox Confucian text interpretations and advocated conservative social and political question approaches. Conversely, the Kogaku Academy, associated with scholars including Yamaga Soko and Ito Jinsai, promoted returning to original Confucian sources and criticized later interpretations they deemed corrupted by Buddhist and other non-Chinese influences. Rangaku, or Dutch learning emergence during this period, granted samurai intellectuals access to European scientific and technical knowledge, challenging traditional assumptions about natural phenomena and technological capabilities. Dutch medical text study, introduced through limited trade contacts maintained at Nagasaki, revealed anatomical and surgical knowledge contradicting Chinese medical theories accepted as authoritative for centuries. Similarly, European astronomy, mathematics, and geography works provided natural world information, forcing scholars to reconsider fundamental assumptions about Japan's place in global context. Rangaku knowledge, practical applications became evident in various domains where progressive administrators encouraged studying European techniques for improving agricultural productivity, manufacturing processes, and military capabilities. Some domains established translation projects making Dutch technical manuals available in Japanese, while others sent selected retainers to Nagasaki to study with Dutch traders and their interpreters. These efforts, though limited by government restrictions on foreign contact, created scholar networks sharing information about European innovations and their potential applications to Japanese conditions. Various martial arts school development during the Genroku period reflected samurai military training, transformation from practical combat preparation into physical and spiritual discipline systems. Ryu, or martial arts school, Proliferation provided samurai with activities maintaining their warrior identity while serving philosophical and educational purposes rather than military ones. Each academy developed distinctive techniques, philosophical principles, and training methods transmitted through formal master-student relationships and protected as proprietary knowledge. The Niitenryu school, founded by legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, exemplified martial technique integration with philosophical insight characterizing Tokugawa-era martial arts. Musashi's teachings, preserved in texts including the Book of Five Rings, presented swordsmanship as a path to understanding fundamental principles applicable to all life aspects. His emphasis on mental clarity, strategic thinking, and adaptability to changing circumstances provided samurai with intellectual frameworks applicable to administrative responsibilities and personal development. Economic diversification characterizing samurai society during this period reflected both financial necessity and changing commercial activity attitudes. Despite official prohibitions against samurai engaging in trade, many warriors found ways to participate in commercial ventures through indirect methods, preserving the appearance of maintaining their social status. Some samurai invested in merchant enterprises through intermediaries, while others used administrative positions to facilitate trade relationships generating unofficial income. These activities, though technically illegal, became increasingly common as domain finances deteriorated and individual samurai struggled maintaining their expected lifestyle on fixed stipends. New cultural expression form development during the Genroku period reflected creative energy generated by different social class interaction in urban environments. Haiku poetry emergence as a distinct literary form perfected by masters including Matsuo Basho demonstrated how traditional aesthetic principles could be adapted to express contemporary sensibilities. Basho's travel narratives, combining poetic observation with philosophical reflection, created fresh literary expression models influencing writers across social boundaries and establishing precedents for exploring relationships between artistic creation and personal experience. Urban entertainment sophistication during this period created fresh opportunities for samurai to participate in cultural activities impossible in earlier eras. Professional sumo wrestling development with organized tournaments and celebrity wrestlers attracting devoted followings provided spectacles appealing to audiences across social classes. Similarly, commercial theatre district growth created venues where samurai could enjoy performances alongside merchants and artisans, participating in shared cultural experiences transcending traditional social boundaries while maintaining distinct identity through seating arrangements and behavioral protocols preserving hierarchical distinctions. The Genroku era's cultural flowering had masked underlying structural problems becoming increasingly apparent as Japan entered the 18th century's second half. The sophisticated urban society emerging in Edo, Osaka, and other major cities depended on agricultural productivity remaining vulnerable to natural disasters, while elaborate governmental systems developed during the early Tokugawa period struggled addressing financial crises plaguing both individual domains and shogunal administration itself. Mounting pressures facing the warrior class during this period would test institutional adaptability designed for stability and prosperity, rather than environmental catastrophes and economic disruptions characterizing the later Edo period. The Tenmei famine of 1782 to 1788 exposed Japan's agricultural foundation fragility and existing relief system inadequacy. The crisis began with Mount Ashama's eruption in 1783, ejecting massive volcanic ash quantities into the atmosphere and disrupting weather patterns across northern Japan. Resulting crop failures, compounded by unusually cold summers and early frosts, created food shortages affecting millions and straining domain resources throughout the archipelago. Contemporary records indicate some regions experienced 20 to 30% population declines as starvation, disease, and migration reduced communities stable for generations. Samurai administrative response to this disaster revealed both Tokugawa governance system capabilities and limitations. Domain officials trained in Confucian principles emphasizing rulers' popular welfare responsibility implemented emergency measures, including opening granaries, distributing seed rice, and organizing public works projects providing employment for displaced farmers. However, these efforts required financial resources many domains lacked, forcing administrators to choose between maintaining retainer stipends and providing adequate disaster relief. Moral and practical dilemmas created by these choices undermined confidence in existing social order and generated resentment persisting for decades. The Tempo famine of 1833 to 1837, more severe than its predecessor, demonstrated problems revealed during the Tenmei crisis hadn't been resolved through intervening decades' reform efforts. This disaster, triggered by volcanic activity, unusual weather patterns, and crop disease combinations, created widespread starvation affecting both rural and urban populations. Edo City, despite sophisticated supply networks and government stockpiles, experienced food riots as desperate residents attacked rice warehouses and merchant establishments. These urban disturbances, unprecedented in scale and violence, shocked samurai administrators assuming their capital city was immune to disorders affecting remote rural areas. The Oshio Heihachiro Rebellion of 1837 emerged directly from frustrations generated by the Tempo famine and perceived official relief effort inadequacy. Oshio, a former Osaka magistrate and accomplished Confucian scholar, had observed first-hand urban poor suffering, while wealthy rice merchants continued exporting grain to regions where prices were higher. His decision to lead armed uprising against Osaka's city government represented a fundamental challenge to the principle that samurai should work within existing institutions rather than resort to violence against legitimate authority. The rebellion itself, though suppressed within one day, demonstrated educated samurai potential to mobilize popular discontent against established order. Oshio's proclamations, written in accessible language and distributed throughout Osaka's commercial districts, articulated grievances resonating with audiences across social boundaries. His criticism of corrupt officials, greedy merchants, and inadequate relief policies provided coherent explanations for daily suffering, while his direct action call offered alternatives to passive acceptance of intolerable conditions. This marked the beginning of the end for the Tokugawa peace. The cracks in paradise were becoming impossible to ignore, setting the stage for the revolutionary changes that would soon transform Japan forever. The magnitude and complexity of these peasant movements challenged core assumptions about social hierarchy and political authority. The Bushu Ikki of 1806, involving over 200,000 participants across multiple provinces, demonstrated organizational capabilities rivaling domain governments. The uprising's leaders, drawn from rural elite classes emerging during agricultural commercialization, possessed resources and connections enabling them to coordinate activities across vast geographical areas while maintaining communication networks. Government authorities struggled, penetrating or disrupting. Samurai response to these popular disturbances revealed the extent to which the warrior class had become dependent on existing social order stability. Many samurai, particularly those serving in rural administrative positions, found themselves trapped between obligations to maintain government authority and recognition that popular grievances were often justified. Traditional warrior emphasis on moral leadership became problematic when government policies clearly violated Confucian benevolent governance principles, forcing individual samurai to choose between loyalty to superiors and adherence to ethical principles. Kyoho reforms implemented by 8th shogun Tokugawa Yoshimune between 1716 to 1845 represented the first systematic attempt addressing structural problems undermining Tokugawa governance. Yoshimune, recognizing financial difficulties were at the root of many administrative problems, initiated policies designed to increase government revenues while reducing expenditures. His approach combined traditional methods including promoting agricultural development and enforcing sumptuary laws with innovative measures, encouraging new crop cultivation, and establishing government monopolies over certain commercial activities. These reform practical implementation required samurai administrators to develop fresh expertise in agricultural technology, commercial regulation, and financial management. Domain officials found themselves responsible for promoting sweet potato, tobacco, and other crop cultivation, not part of traditional Japanese agriculture, while simultaneously learning to manage complex relationships with merchant groups possessing superior market condition and commercial practice knowledge. Kansei reforms of 1787 to 1793 implemented under senior counselor Matsudaira Sadanobu's leadership, reflected more conservative approaches, emphasizing moral regeneration and returning to traditional values as contemporary problem solutions. Sadanobu, the 8th shogun's grandson and prominent orthodox Neo-Confucian principle advocate, argued Japan's difficulties resulted from moral decay and departure from ethical standards characterizing earlier prosperity and stability periods. His reform program included measures strengthening samurai education, eliminating government administration corruption, and restoring social boundaries blurred through commercial development and urban sophistication. Educational initiatives implemented during Kansei established fresh samurai training standards emphasizing classical scholarship and moral cultivation over practical skills. Tempo reforms of 1841 to 1843, led by senior counselor Mizuno Tadakuni, represented the most ambitious attempt at restructuring Japanese society through government intervention. Mizuno's program included measures relocating urban populations back to rural areas, eliminating unauthorized commercial activities, and restoring social order allegedly existing during the early Tokugawa period. These policies reflected both genuine social problem concern and fundamental misunderstanding of economic and demographic changes transforming Japanese society during the previous 2 centuries. Tempo reform failure demonstrated administrative solution limitations to problems having deeper structural causes. Intellectual ferment accompanying these reform efforts produced fresh scholarship forms challenging traditional governance and social organization assumptions. Kokugaku, or national learning development, provided alternatives to Chinese-derived intellectual frameworks dominating Japanese scholarship for centuries. Scholars including Motori Norinaga and Hirata Atsutane argued Japan possessed indigenous knowledge and governance traditions superior to foreign imports and more suitable for addressing contemporary challenges. Kokugaku emphasis on Japanese uniqueness and cultural superiority resonated with samurai, frustrated with Confucian approach limitations to contemporary problems. The movement's focus on ancient Japanese texts, including Kojiki and Manyoshu, provided scholars with authority sources independent of Chinese precedents, while its imperial tradition celebration offered alternatives to shogunal systems proven inadequate for addressing current challenges. Sonojoi movement combining emperor reverence with foreign influence, opposition represented Kokugeku scholarship synthesis, with practical concerns about Japan's international position. The slogan, "Revere the Emperor, Expel the Barbarians," provided simple but powerful formulas uniting diverse groups sharing dissatisfaction with existing conditions, while offering clear political action programs. Practical challenges facing domain administrations during this period forced many samurai to develop fresh expertise in military technology, international relations, and economic development. Increasing awareness of Western military capabilities transmitted through Dutch learning and direct foreign ship observation created pressure for military reforms beyond traditional martial arts training. Some domains established Western-style military units equipped with modern firearms and trained in European tactical methods, while others invested in coastal fortifications designed to resist potential foreign invasion. Financial pressures accompanying these military preparations exacerbated economic problems building throughout the late Tokugawa period. Growing recognition that Japan's isolation policy might be unsustainable facing Western expansion created divisions within samurai society about proper responses to foreign pressure. Some warriors, influenced by Rangaku scholarship and direct Western capability observation, argued Japan needed abandoning traditional isolation and adopting Western technology and institutions to maintain independence. Others, drawing on Kokugaku teachings and traditional xenophobia, insisted foreign influence represented fundamental threats to Japanese culture and political independence requiring resistance at any cost. These foreign policy debates became increasingly urgent as Western expansion reports in Asia reached Japan through Dutch and Chinese sources. The Opium War of 1839 to 1842, where British forces defeated Chinese armies and forced Qing government acceptance of humiliating treaty terms, demonstrated military superiority Western powers could deploy against Asian opponents. This conflict's implications for Japan's own security became intense discussion, subjects among samurai intellectuals and government officials recognizing their nation's isolation might not provide adequate protection against determined foreign pressure. Internal contradictions within samurai society became increasingly apparent as these various pressures mounted during the 1840s and early 1850s. The warrior class found itself simultaneously responsible for maintaining traditional social order and adapting to unprecedented challenges requiring fresh knowledge forms and institutional innovation. Tension between preserving samurai privilege and addressing practical problems created conflicts individual warriors struggled resolving within existing ideological frameworks. New political organisation forms emergence during this period reflected both traditional institution inadequacy and greater potential of samurai willing to experiment with alternative approaches. Study groups, discussion societies, and informal networks provided venues for exploring ideas and developing strategies beyond official channel limitations. These organisations, though often small and secretive, created connections between like-minded individuals across domain boundaries and established foundations for political movements emerging during Tokugawa rule's final crisis. Mounting evidence of systemic problems within Japanese society created impending crisis senses affecting all social hierarchy levels. Natural disasters, economic difficulties, popular uprisings, and foreign pressure combined creating challenges existing institutions seemed incapable of addressing effectively. Reform movements of this period, despite innovative elements and genuine efforts addressing real problems, had failed providing sustainable solutions to fundamental Tokugawa system contradictions. As the 1850s began, Japan faced uncertain futures where traditional governance and social organization approaches would be tested by forces ultimately transforming the nation beyond recognition. Pressures building throughout the late Edo period reached critical junctures on July 8, 1853, when Commodore Matthew Perry's 4 black ships appeared in Iyo Bay, their steam engines billowing dark smoke visible from the shogun's castle. These iron-hulled vessels, armed with modern cannons and capable of moving against wind and tide, shattered security illusions Japan's isolation policy had provided for over 2 centuries, marking the definitive end of the samurai age of peace and the beginning of Japan's violent transformation into a modern nation. Perry's strategic approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Japanese political psychology and internal weaknesses plaguing the Tokugawa structure. Rather than immediately demanding negotiations, he delivered President Fillmore's letter requesting trade relations and announced his intention to return the following year for a response, giving Japanese officials time to consider their options, while making clear that refusal would have serious consequences. This calculated restraint display, combined with American naval firepower demonstrations including cannon salutes, audible throughout Edo, created maximum psychological impact while avoiding immediate military confrontation. The year-long interval between Perry's first and second visits exposed fundamental divisions within samurai society about how Japan should respond to foreign pressure. The shogunal government, recognizing its inability to resist American demands through military force, solicited opinions from daimyo throughout the country in an unprecedented departure from traditional decision-making procedures. This consultation process, while intended to build consensus for accommodation with foreign powers, instead revealed disagreement depth among the warrior class about Japan's proper course of action. Responses submitted by various domains reflected intellectual and ideological ferment developing within samurai society throughout the late Edo period. Progressive daimyo, including Shimazu Nariakira of Satsuma and Nabeshima Naomasa of Saga, argued Japan needed abandoning its isolation policy and adopting Western technology to maintain independence. Conservative lords, particularly those associated with Kyoto's imperial court, insisted opening the country to foreign influence would corrupt Japanese culture and undermine political order, maintaining stability for over 2 centuries. The Treaty of Kanagawa, signed on March 31, 1854, represented a compromise satisfying neither foreign demands nor domestic opposition, but reflected limited options available to the Tokugawa government. The agreement opened 2 ports to American ships for provisioning and established consular relations while avoiding comprehensive commercial arrangements following in subsequent negotiations. However, The treaty's significance extended beyond its specific provisions to establish precedent that foreign powers could compel Japan to modify traditional policies through military force threats. Domestic political crisis triggered by this forced opening intensified as additional Western powers demanded similar treaty arrangements. The Harris Treaty of 1858, negotiating more extensive commercial relations with the United States, required Japanese officials to accept extraterritorial rights for foreign residents and customs duty limitations compromising national sovereignty. These concessions, negotiated without imperial approval, provided Tokugawa government opponents with powerful arguments about the shogunate's betrayal of Japanese interests and inability to defend national independence. The Sono-Joi movement's emergence as coherent political force reflected anti-foreign sentiment convergence with broader dissatisfaction about Tokugawa governance. The slogan "Revere the Emperor, Expel the Barbarians" provided rallying cries uniting diverse samurai groups sharing opposition to existing order, while offering clear alternative programs based on imperial restoration and resistance to Western influence. The Ansei Purge of 1858 to 1860, implemented by senior councillor Inao Suke, responding to growing opposition, demonstrated both Tokugawa's system authoritarian potential and its ultimate inability to suppress dissent through repressive measures. Ii's campaign against Sono-Joi activists resulted in execution or imprisonment of over 100 samurai from various domains, including prominent intellectuals and political leaders advocating imperial restoration. However, these harsh measures, rather than deterring opposition, instead created martyrs whose deaths inspired additional resistance and undermined moral authority. The shogunal government needed maintaining legitimacy. Ii Naosuke's assassination outside Edo Castle's Sakuradaman on March 24, 1860, marked a turning point in political crisis, ultimately destroying Tokugawa rule. The attack, carried out by 18 ronin from Maito and Satsuma domains, demonstrated Sono-Joi activists' willingness to resort to terrorism against government officials collaborating with foreign powers. Successful penetration of shogun security perimeter and assassination's public nature created psychological shock reverberating throughout the warrior class and exposed vulnerability of even highest Tokugawa officials. Political vacuum created by Ii's death and broader confidence crisis in shogunal leadership provided opportunities for ambitious domains to assert greater independence while positioning themselves as imperial interest defenders. Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa and other Western domains began implementing military reforms and developing autonomous foreign policies challenging Tokugawa authority. Satsuma domain's response to changing political situations exemplified pragmatic adaptation characterizing the most successful Tokugawa rule opponents. Under Shimazu Hisamitsu's leadership and advisors Saigo Takamori and Okubo Toshimichi, Satsuma implemented comprehensive military modernization programs while maintaining loyalty appearances to traditional institutions. The Namamugi incident of September 14, 1862 demonstrated Satsuma's willingness to confront foreign powers directly while exposing the shogunate's inability to control nominal vassals. When British merchant Charles Richardson failed showing proper respect to Shimazu Hisamitsu's procession, Satsuma retainers killed him and wounded companions according to traditional protocols foreigners were expected observing. The subsequent Kagoshima bombardment by British fleet in August 1863 provided Satsuma leaders with direct experience of Western military capabilities while demonstrating traditional coastal defense futility against modern naval power. However, the engagement's inconclusive nature and British withdrawal without achieving political objectives convinced Satsuma leaders that Western powers could be resisted through proper preparation and modern military methods. Choshu domain's more radical approach to anti-foreign campaigns reflected both ideological commitment and strategic calculation about changing power balance within Japan. Under activists' influence, including Kido Takeyoshi and Takasugi Shinsaku, Choshu positioned itself as the most uncompromising foreign influence opponent while implementing military reforms incorporating Western technology and tactics. The bombardment of foreign ships in Shimonoseki Straits beginning May 1863 represented Choshu's attempt implementing Joi policy through direct military action. Domain forces equipped with modern artillery purchased through Dutch traders attacked American, French, and Dutch vessels transiting strategic waterways connecting inland sea with open ocean. The combined Western assault on Choshu positions in September 1864 demonstrated overwhelming superiority of coordinated modern military forces against traditional defensive arrangements. The multinational fleet consisting of British, French, American, and Dutch warships systematically destroyed Choshu's coastal fortifications while landing forces occupied key shoreline positions. The Choshu Civil War of 1864 to 1865 represented crucial testing of competing approaches to military modernization and political reform within the anti-Tokugawa coalition. Progressive factions organized around Takasugi Shinsaku's Kihei-tai militia units argued successful resistance required comprehensive social and military transformation, abandoning traditional class distinctions favoring merit-based advancement. Progressive forces' victory in this internal struggle established precedents for military and social reform, influencing the entire restoration movement. The Kihei-tai units, composed of samurai, ashigaru, and commoners serving together under unified command, demonstrated superior effectiveness compared to traditional domain forces organized according to hereditary status. These mixed units, equipped with modern weapons and trained in Western tactics, provided military organization models other domains would adopt as they prepared for final confrontation with Tokugawa forces, marking the end of Japan's samurai age and the birth of a modern nation forged in the crucible of revolutionary change. The Satsuma Choshu Alliance, established in early 1806 with mediation by Sakamoto Ryoma, marked a critical political breakthrough enabling the restoration. Despite historic rivalries and differing reform approaches, Satsuma and Choshu united militarily to oppose the Tokugawa shogunate and coordinate the broader anti-shogunate movement. The alliance's terms on joint military support and political cooperation set a framework that endured beyond the restoration and influenced Meiji governance. The 1806 Choshu campaign exposed the military weakness of the Tokugawa government and demonstrated the effectiveness of reform domain forces. Though the shogunate fielded over 100,000 troops, lacking unified coordination and modern weaponry hindered success. Outnumbered, Choshu forces employed superior tactics and armaments to achieve decisive victories that forced Tokugawa retreats. The death of Shogun Yoshinobu opened diplomatic opportunities, but efforts at compromise failed as the old order collapsed under internal and foreign pressures. The 1868 Meiji Restoration combined revolutionary change with conservative restoration. The Charter Oath promised representative assemblies, international engagement, and social mobility, while maintaining imperial authority and traditional values. The new regime dismantled feudal domains, replacing them with centralized prefectures, abolished the samurai stipend system by converting payouts into bonds, and prohibited sword-wearing. The conscript army and the Satsuma Rebellion marked the samurai's fading martial era, as many transitioned into administrative and educational roles, preserving their social relevance in modern Japan. The systematic elimination of institutions governing Japan for over 2.5 centuries required careful orchestration. The Han system's abolition in 1871, substituting autonomous territories with centrally controlled prefectures, destroyed the political foundation of samurai authority while establishing unified national administration. This transformation, accomplished with minimal resistance from daimyo, compensated through government securities and ceremonial positions, demonstrated how thoroughly traditional authorities recognized the necessity for fundamental change. Converting samurai stipends into government securities represented the initial step in eliminating the warrior class's economic foundation. The commutation process, implemented between 1873 and 1876, replaced hereditary rice payments with interest-bearing bonds providing immediate capital while reducing long-term governmental obligations. Many samurai, lacking experience with financial instruments and commercial investment, quickly sold their securities at substantial discounts to merchants and speculators understanding their true value, accelerating wealth transfer from the former warrior class to commercial interests. The sword-wearing prohibition implemented in 1876 eliminated the most visible symbol of samurai status, and marked their privileged position's formal end within Japanese society. The Haitere, or Sword Abolition Edict, prohibited all except military and police personnel from carrying traditional weapons distinguishing the warrior class for centuries. This measure, while seemingly symbolic, had profound psychological impact on samurai, who had defined their identity through their relationship to these weapons and the martial traditions they represented. Universal military conscription establishment in 1873 completed Japan's military system transformation from hereditary warrior class to modern national army based on European models. The new system, requiring 3 years active service from all male subjects regardless of social background, created military forces both larger and more professionally trained than traditional samurai armies. Integrating Western military technology, tactics, and organizational methods produced armed forces capable of defending Japan against foreign threats while maintaining domestic order. Resistance to these transformations culminated in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, the final military challenge to the Meiji government's modernization program. Saigo Takamori, the former Satsuma leader who played crucial roles in the restoration, emerged as symbolic leader of samurai opposition to the new order. His decision to lead approximately 40,000 traditional warriors against the imperial government represented both personal disillusionment with reform direction and broader samurai resistance to their loss of status and purpose. The Kumamoto Castle siege, beginning February 1877, demonstrated both continued martial capabilities of traditional samurai forces and superior resources available to the Meiji government. Saigo's army, composed primarily of former Satsuma samurai, equipped with traditional weapons and organized according to classical military principles, initially achieved significant tactical successes against government forces. However, Kumamoto's defenders, supported by modern artillery and supplied through secure communication lines, maintained positions while government reinforcements assembled for the decisive campaign. The rebellion's final phase, culminating in the Battle of Shiroyama on September 24, 1877, symbolically marked the samurai era's end in Japanese history. Saigo's remaining forces, reduced to fewer than 500 men and surrounded by over 30,000 government troops equipped with modern weapons, made a final charge embodying traditional warrior values of honor and loyalty, while acknowledging resistance futility to the new order. Saigo's death in this engagement, whether by enemy fire or ritual suicide, provided heroic conclusion to the samurai's role as Japan's military elite, while clearing the way for complete Japanese society modernization. The Satsuma Rebellion's suppression demonstrated the Meiji government's military reform effectiveness while establishing the new regime's authority throughout Japan. The Imperial Army's victory over the country's most formidable traditional military force proved modern military organization and technology had made samurai warfare obsolete. The rebellion's failure also eliminated the last significant domestic challenge to the government's modernization program, enabling officials to focus attention on international relations and economic development rather than internal security concerns. The crushing defeat marked not the end of samurai influence in Japanese society, but rather the beginning of their most profound transformation. The former warrior class, dripped of hereditary privileges and traditional military function, faced the challenge of finding new roles within the rapidly modernizing Meiji state. Rather than disappearing into historical obscurity, many ex-samurai demonstrated remarkable adaptability, leveraging their educational background, administrative experience, and leadership skills to become architects of Japan's emergence as modern industrial power. Integration of former samurai into Meiji society occurred through multiple channels reflecting both government policy and individual initiative. The new imperial army, despite commitment to universal conscription, required experienced officers providing leadership and tactical knowledge during transition to modern military methods. Many former samurai found natural careers as military officers, where their traditional emphasis on discipline, loyalty, and martial training proved valuable in creating professional armed forces. Government service provided another major avenue for former samurai seeking to rebuild careers within the new system. The Meiji administration, faced with enormous tasks of creating modern governmental institutions from scratch, needed educated personnel possessing both literacy skills and understanding of administrative procedures. Ex-samurai who had comprised the bureaucratic class under the Tokugawa system possessed qualifications making them natural candidates for expanding civil service positions. The educational sector offered particularly attractive opportunities for former samurai possessing scholarly inclinations and teaching abilities. The Meiji government's commitment to universal education created demand for teachers, school administrators, and curriculum developers implementing Western educational methods while maintaining Japanese cultural values. Many ex-samurai became principals and teachers in the new school system, where their traditional emphasis on moral cultivation and character development aligned with governmental goals for citizen education. Business and industry, initially viewed with suspicion by many ex-samurai due to traditional prejudices against commercial activity, gradually attracted growing numbers of former warriors recognizing economic opportunities created by Japan's industrial development, completing their transformation from medieval warriors into modern citizens of an emerging industrial power. The administration's vigorous support of commercial ventures through grants, protective strategies, and technical guidance established advantageous circumstances for entrepreneurial endeavors. Some former warriors founded production firms that manufactured goods for local consumption, while others became involved in commerce connecting Japanese creators with international markets. The transformation of Bushido from a functional warrior code into a nationalistic doctrine represented one of the most significant developments in samurai culture's evolution during the Meiji era. Government leaders and intellectual figures seeking to forge national unity and popular support for modernization efforts drew selectively from warrior traditions to construct an idealized version of martial ethics that could inspire devotion to the emperor and commitment to national objectives. This reconstructed warrior philosophy emphasized absolute fidelity, self-sacrifice, and dedication to service, while de-emphasizing the individualistic and pragmatic aspects of historical martial culture. The process of ideological transformation involves systematic reinterpretation of historical sources and selective emphasis on particular aspects of samurai heritage. Government-sponsored historians and educators promoted narratives that portrayed warriors as selfless servants of imperial authority who had always placed national interests above personal concerns. These accounts minimized political conflicts, regional loyalties, and practical considerations that had actually motivated much warrior behavior throughout history, creating instead a simplified and romanticized version of martial culture that served contemporary political needs. Educational institutions played crucial roles in disseminating this reconstructed warrior philosophy to the general population through textbooks, ceremonies, and moral instruction programs. The Imperial Rescript on Education issued in 1890 incorporated samurai-derived values such as loyalty, filial piety, and self-sacrifice into a comprehensive framework for citizen education that applied to all social classes. Students throughout Japan learned to view these warrior virtues as essential elements of Japanese national character that distinguished their country from Western nations and provided the foundation for Japan's unique approach to modernization. Military education and training programs became primary vehicles for transmitting this warrior ideology to young Japanese men through the conscription system and military academies. The Imperial Japanese Army developed elaborate indoctrination procedures that presented military service as the highest expression of samurai values and the most direct way for ordinary citizens to participate in the warrior tradition. These programs emphasized continuity between historical samurai and contemporary soldiers, while adapting traditional concepts of honor and loyalty to support modern military discipline and tactical requirements. The influence of this militarized warrior philosophy extended far beyond the armed forces to shape civilian attitudes toward authority, social relationships, and national purpose. Government propaganda and popular culture promoted the idea that all Japanese citizens should embody warrior virtues in their daily lives, whether as students, workers, or family members. This democratization of martial values created a sense of shared identity and common purpose that facilitated social mobilization for national projects, while reinforcing hierarchical relationships and obedience to authority. The evolution of warrior ideology accelerated during periods of international conflict when the government sought to mobilize popular support for military campaigns. the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, and the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, provided opportunities to demonstrate the practical effectiveness of samurai-inspired military training and national spirit. Victory in these conflicts validated the government's claims about the superiority of Japanese values and the continuing relevance of warrior traditions in the modern world. During the 1930s and early 1940s, warrior ideology became increasingly extreme and militaristic as Japan moved toward total war with China and eventually the Allied powers. Government propagandists and military leaders promoted interpretations of samurai tradition that emphasized death before dishonor, absolute obedience to superiors, and willingness to sacrifice individual lives for national goals. These extreme versions of warrior philosophy provided ideological justification for kamikaze attacks, civilian resistance to Allied occupation forces, and other desperate measures that reflected military leadership's commitment to fighting until complete destruction, rather than accepting defeat. The association of warrior philosophy with Japanese militarism and wartime atrocities created serious problems for the survival of samurai cultural traditions in the post-war period. Allied occupation authorities, particularly American officials responsible for democratizing Japanese society, viewed traditional warrior values as incompatible with peaceful democratic governance and international cooperation. The new Japanese constitution implemented in 1947 explicitly renounced war as a means of resolving international disputes and committed the nation to peaceful development based on democratic principles rather than military strength. The post-war re-examination of samurai culture involved complex processes of selective preservation, critical analysis, and creative reinterpretation that reflected both domestic needs and international pressures. Japanese intellectuals and cultural leaders faced the challenge of distinguishing valuable elements of their warrior heritage from the militaristic distortions that had contributed to the disasters of the Pacific War. This effort required careful historical research to understand what samurai culture had actually involved, as opposed to the idealized versions promoted by government propaganda during the imperial period. Academic historians played crucial roles in this re-examination process by conducting detailed studies of samurai society, politics, and culture based on primary sources rather than ideological assumptions. Their research revealed the complexity and diversity of historical warrior culture, challenging both the romanticized portrayals promoted by Meiji and wartime governments and the wholesale condemnations offered by critics of Japanese militarism. These scholarly investigations provided foundations for more nuanced understandings of samurai traditions that could appreciate their historical significance while acknowledging their limitations and contradictions. The romanticization of samurai culture in post-war literature, film, and popular media reflected both nostalgia for a heroic past and desire to reconstruct positive elements of Japanese identity after the trauma of defeat and occupation. Writers such as Mishima Yukio explored themes of honor, loyalty, and aesthetic perfection that drew on samurai traditions while addressing contemporary concerns about cultural authenticity and spiritual meaning in modern society. Their works presented complex and often contradictory portrayals of warrior culture that acknowledged both its attractions and its dangers. Cinema became perhaps the most influential medium for reshaping popular perceptions of samurai culture both within Japan and internationally. Directors such as Kurosawa Akira created films that presented sophisticated and nuanced portrayals of warrior society, emphasizing individual moral struggles rather than simple heroics or nationalist propaganda. Movies like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo depicted warriors as complex human beings facing difficult ethical choices in morally ambiguous situations, providing audiences with models of heroism that emphasize personal integrity rather than blind obedience to authority. The international success of Japanese samurai films introduced global audiences to warrior culture and created widespread fascination with Japanese martial traditions. These movies, while often historically inaccurate in their details, conveyed essential aspects of samurai values such as dedication to craft mastery, acceptance of mortality, and commitment to personal honor that resonated with viewers across cultural boundaries. The global popularity of samurai cinema contributed to the development of martial arts communities throughout the world and influenced popular culture in ways that continue to evolve. Contemporary manifestations of samurai legacy in Japanese business culture reflect both continuity with historical traditions and adaptation to modern economic requirements. Many Japanese corporations have adopted organizational principles and management practices that draw explicitly on samurai concepts of loyalty, hierarchy, and group solidarity. The lifetime employment system that characterized major Japanese companies during the post-war economic boom reflected samurai ideals of mutual obligation between lords and retainers. The worldwide practice of Japanese martial arts represents perhaps the most direct contemporary connection to samurai traditions, ensuring that the warrior spirit, transformed and refined through centuries of change, continues to inspire and guide people around the globe in their pursuit of excellence, honor, and personal mastery. Despite evolving dramatically from their original combat purposes, martial disciplines including kendo, judo, aikido, and karate have expanded globally, attracting millions who pursue physical wellness, mental clarity, and spiritual advancement derived from warrior legacies. These academies maintain technical expertise and philosophical insights linking practitioners to centuries of samurai heritage, while adapting ancient practices to contemporary requirements. The transformation from battle skills to personal development systems demonstrates how samurai traditions evolve within modern contexts. Contemporary martial arts prioritize character building, respect, and self-improvement over combat effectiveness or social dominance. Such adaptations make warrior-inspired practices accessible to everyone, preserving essential cultural values beneficial for individual and community growth. International martial arts networks support ongoing academic study of samurai history by preserving ancient texts and fostering cross-cultural collaboration. This global community of practitioners and researchers has established fresh opportunities for intercultural exchange and cooperative investigation that enhances comprehension of warrior traditions while ensuring their continued evolution and adaptation. Recent research continues uncovering complex, nuanced perspectives of samurai existence, challenging simplistic heroic myths that have dominated popular understanding. Archaeological excavations of fortress sites, examination of newly discovered manuscripts, and comparative analysis with other warrior societies have provided increasingly sophisticated portraits of how samurai civilization actually operated. These investigative efforts have revealed the diversity and intricacy of warrior experiences while highlighting discrepancies between historical reality and later romantic interpretations. Distinguishing historical facts from mythologized narratives remains central to contemporary scholars seeking to comprehend the actual role of samurai in Japanese history. Accumulated layers of interpretation, ideological manipulation, and popular culture representation have created multiple versions of samurai culture that frequently contradict each other and bear minimal resemblance to historical evidence. Separating authentic historical information from later additions requires careful examination of primary sources and critical evaluation of political and cultural contexts that shape different interpretations. Contemporary Japanese society continues wrestling with samurai culture's legacy in ways reflecting both pride in historical accomplishments and awareness of problems associated with militaristic interpretations of warrior traditions. Public discussions about constitutional revision, military expenditure, and Japan's international role often invoke samurai imagery and values, though usually emphasizing peaceful applications of traditional virtues rather than aggressive nationalism. The challenge of maintaining cultural continuity while avoiding past mistakes remains central in Japanese political and cultural discourse. Global fascination with samurai culture suggests warrior traditions continue offering insights and inspiration transcending their specific historical context. Samurai emphasis on discipline, loyalty, and personal excellence resonates with contemporary concerns about character development, professional ethics, and meaningful achievement. However, selective appropriation of samurai values requires careful consideration of their original context and potential consequences to avoid repeating distortions that contributed to earlier disasters. The transformation of samurai from medieval fighters into symbols of cultural identity and personal aspiration represents one of history's most remarkable examples of cultural adaptation. Their journey from practical warriors defending regional interests to bureaucratic administrators serving centralized government to inspirational figures in global popular culture demonstrates complex processes through which historical traditions evolve to meet changing social needs. The continuing evolution of samurai legacy suggests these warrior traditions will remain relevant and influential as long as human societies value courage, dedication, and the pursuit of excellence. Though their specific manifestations will undoubtedly continue changing in response to new challenges and opportunities, the samurai story ultimately reflects humanity's broader struggle to balance individual achievement with social responsibility, traditional values with practical adaptation, and cultural identity with universal aspirations. Their legacy serves as both inspiration and warning, demonstrating human excellence potential while illustrating extremism's dangers and the importance of maintaining perspective about warrior values' proper role in civilized society. As Japan and the world continue evolving, samurai tradition will likely continue providing both guidance and caution for those seeking to understand complex relationships between culture, politics, and human nature. The samurai's enduring influence transcends their historical period, offering timeless lessons about honor, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of mastery. From the blood-soaked battlefields of ancient Japan to modern corporate boardrooms and martial arts dojos worldwide, their spirit lives on, transformed, refined, and adapted to serve humanity's eternal quest for excellence. In an age of rapid technological change and social upheaval, the samurai remind us that some values remain constant. The importance of discipline in achieving goals, the power of unwavering loyalty to worthy causes, and the nobility found in dedicating one's life to something greater than oneself. Their story teaches us that true strength comes not from the sword, but from the character of those who wield it, and that the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in the daily struggle to become better versions of ourselves. The samurai may have disappeared as a social class, but their essence continues inspiring millions around the world who seek meaning, purpose, and excellence in their own lives. This is their ultimate victory, not conquest through force, but transformation through example, ensuring their legacy will endure as long as humanity strives for greatness.